smaller in the female than in the male, and the distortion of its branch is somewhat different. The description of its arrangement in the male will first be given, and subsequently the difference which it presents in the female will be mentioned. The internal pudendal artery in the male passes downward and outward of the lower border to the greater sciatic foramen, and emerges from the pelvis between the piriformis and the coccygus. It then crosses the ischial spine and enters the perineum through the lesser sciatic foramen. The artery now crosses the obturator internus along the lateral wall of the ischiorectal fossa, being situated about 4 centimeters above the lower margin of the ischial tuberosity. It gradually approaches the margin of the inferior ramus of the ischium and passes forward between the two layers of the fascia of the urogenital diaphragm. It then runs forward along the medial margin of the inferior ramus of the pubis, and about 2.25 centimeters behind the pubic accurate ligament it pierces the inferior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm and divides into the dorsal and deep arteries of the penis. Relations. Within the pelvis, it lies in front of the piriformis muscle, the sacral plexus of nerves, and the inferior gluteal artery. As it crosses the ischial spine, it is covered by the gluteus maximus, and overlapped by the sacrotuberous ligament. Here the pudendal nerve lies to the medial side, and the nerve of the obturator internus to the lateral side of the vessel. In the perineum it lies on the lateral wall of the ischiorectal fossa, in a canal, Alcock's canal, formed by the splitting of the obturator fascia. It is accompanied by a pair of vena comitantes and the pudendal nerve. Peculiarities. The internal pudendal artery is sometimes smaller than usual, or fails to give off one or two of its usual branches. In such cases the deficiency is supplied by branches derived from an additional vessel, the accessory pudendal, which generally arises from the internal pudendal artery before its exit from the greater sciatic foramen. It passes downward along the lower part of the bladder, and across the side of the prostate to the root of the penis, where it perforates the urogenital diaphragm, and gives off the branches usually derived from the internal pudendal artery. The deficiency most frequently met with is that in which the internal pudendal ends as the artery of the urethral pulp, the dorsal and deep arteries of the penis being derived from the accessory pudendal. The internal pudendal artery may also end as the perineal, the artery of the urethral bulb being derived, with the other two branches, from the accessory vessel. Occasionally, the accessory pudendal artery is derived from one of the other branches of the hypogastric artery, most frequently the inferior vesicle or the obturator. Branches. The branches of the internal pudendal artery are muscular, inferior hemorrhoidal, perineal, artery of the urethral pulp, urethral, deep artery of the penis, dorsal artery of the penis. The muscular branches consist of two sets, one given off in the pelvis, the other as the vessel crosses the ischial spine. The former consists of several small offsets, which supply the levator ani, the obturator internus, the piriformis, the coccygus. The branches given off outside the pelvis are distributed to the adjacent parts of the gluteus maximus and external rotator muscles. The anastomosis branches of the inferior gluteal artery. The inferior hemorrhoidal artery, arteria hemorrhoidalis inferior, arises from the internal pudendal as it passes above the ischial tuberosity. Piercing the wall of Alcock's canal, it divides into 2 or 3 branches which cross the ischiorectal fossa and are distributed to the muscles and integument of the anal region, and send offshots around the lower edge of the gluteus maximus to the skin of the buttock. The anastomose with the corresponding vessels of the opposite side, with the superior and the middle hemorrhoidal, and with the perineal artery. The perineal artery, arteria perinei, superficial perineal artery, arises from the internal pudendal in front of the preceding branches and turns upward, crossing either over or under the transversus perinei superficialis, and runs downward, parallel to the pubic arch, in the interspace between the bulbocavernosus and the ischiocavernosus, both of which it supplies, and finally divides into several posterior scrotal branches, which are distributed to the skin and dartos tunic of the scrotum. As it crosses the transversus perinei superficialis, it gives off the transverse perineal artery, which runs transversely on the cutaneous surface of the muscle, and anastomosis with the corresponding vessel of the opposite side, and with the perineal and inferior hemorrhoidal arteries. It supplies the transversus perinei superficialis, the structures between the anus and the urethral bulb. The artery of the urethral bulb, arteria bulbi urethrae, is a short vessel of a large caliber which arises from the internal pudendal between the two layers of fascia of the urogenital diaphragm. It passes medialward, pierces the inferior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm, and gives off branches which ramify in the bulb of the ureter, and in the posterior part of the corpus cavernosum urethrae. It gives off a small branch to the bulbourethral gland. The urethral artery, arteria urethralis, arises a short distance in front of the artery of the urethral bulb. It runs forward and medialward, pierces the inferior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm, enters the corpus cavernosum urethrae, in which it is continued forward to the glans penis. The deep artery of the penis, arteria profunda penis, artery of the corpus cavernosum, one of the terminal branches of the internal pudendal, arises from that vessel, while it is situated between the two fasciae of the urogenital diaphragm. It pierces the inferior fascia, and entering the crus penis obliquely, runs forward in the centre of the corpus cavernosum penis, to which its branches are distributed. The dorsal artery of the penis, arteria dorsalis penis, ascends between the crus penis and the pubic symphysis, and piercing the inferior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm, passes between the two layers of the suspensory ligament of the penis, and runs forward on the dorsum of the penis to the glans, where it divides into two branches, which supply the glans and the prepuce. On the penis it lies between the dorsal nerve and the deep dorsal vein, the former being on its lateral side. It supplies the integument and fibrous sheath of the corpus cavernosum penis, sending branches through the sheath to anastomose with the preceding vessel. The internal pudendal artery in the female is smaller than in the male. Its origin and course is similar, and there is considerable analogy in the distribution of its branches. The perineal artery supplies the labia putendi, the artery of the bulb supplies the bulbus vestibuli and the erectile tissue of the vagina, and the deep artery of the clitoris supplies the corpus cavernosum clitoris, and the dorsal artery of the clitoris supplies the dorsum of the organ, and ends in the glans and prepubis of the clitoris. The inferior internal gluteal artery, arteria glutea inferior, sciatic artery, the larger of the two terminal branches of the anterior trunk of the hypogastric, is distributed chiefly to the buttock and back of the thigh. It passes down on the sacral plexus of nerves and the piriformis, behind the internal pudendal artery, the lower part of the greater sciatic foramen, through which it escapes from the pelvis, between the piriformis and the coccygus. It then descends in the interval between the greater trochanter of the femur and tuberosity of the ischium, accompanied by the sciatic and posterior femoral cutaneous nerves, and covered by the gluteus maximus, and is continued down the back of the thigh, supplying the skin and anastomosing with the branches of the perforating arteries. Inside the pelvis it distributes branches to the piriformis, coccygus, and levator ani, some branches which supply the fat around the rectum and occasionally take the place of the middle hemorrhoidal artery, and vesical branches to the fundus of the bladder, vesiculae seminales, and prostate. Outside the pelvis it gives off the following branches: muscular, coccygeal, committens nervi ischiadici, anastomotic, articular, cutaneous. The muscular branches supply the gluteus maximus, anastomosing with the superior gluteal artery in the substance of the muscle, the external rotators anastomosing with the internal pudendal artery, and the muscles attached to the tuberosity of the ischium anastomosing with the posterior branch of the obturator and the medial femoral circumflex arteries. The coccygeal branches run medialward, pierce the sacrotuberous ligament, and supply the gluteus maximus, the integument, and other structures on the back of the coccyx. The arteriocommittens nervi ischiadici is a long, slender vessel, which accompanies the sciatic nerve for a short distance. It then penetrates it and runs in its substance to the lower part of the thigh. The anastomotic is directed downward across the external rotators and assists in forming the so-called crucial anastomosis by joining with the first perforating and medial and lateral femoral circumflex arteries. The articular branch, generally derived from the anastomotic, is distributed to the capsule of the hip joint. The cutaneous branches are distributed to the skin of the buttock and back of the thigh. The iliolumbar artery, arteria iliolumbalis, a branch of the posterior trunk of the hypogastric, turns upward behind the obturator nerve and the external iliac vessel. to the medial border of the psoas major, behind which it divides into a lumbar and an iliac branch.